Welcome to the Cafe Nightly Show. It is Friday. It is late. It is the 5th of January, 2024, and day number 2 of Totems because no new announcement. So we're going to do a little bit deeper dive. I did say yesterday that I want to get a video out. I'll get that out tomorrow. But a little deeper dive tonight on a couple things on the Totem announcement, just because I've heard a lot of questions that there are answers to. There are some that there aren't, but there's a lot of questions that there are still answers to. So we'll do a few more questions, answers, and anybody who wants to put out questions, love to see those. But for tonight, do want to go over a little more resources so we know a little more about totems. Went over a couple resources so you can learn more last night, but I do want to reiterate a couple of those so you can get the source material. You can do some of your own research, and then I can give you some of the conclusions that are already easy to make. But before we get things started, as always, all views and opinions expressed by myself are mine and mine alone. Not game strategy advice, should not be taken as financial advice. Don't buy a ton of totems just because I tell you how to use them. But of course, if I do say something that sounds like I'm representing Upland, the game of Upland, team of Upland, that's not the case. Obviously, my views are mine and mine alone. So getting started here, getting that up. Jumping in real quick, I do want to look at a couple things. First and foremost, going back to the well here, we're going to look at the announcement itself from yesterday. Nothing major. Again, I went over it yesterday. You can definitely see the recorded show if you want to see the full announcement to try to go into a little bit of detail, but just to touch on a couple things so that we can look more specifically on a couple of the things that seem to be creating the most questions for people along the way, seem to be the least defined, at least as a lot of people have been seeing them. And then, of course, if people have questions along the way, I am watching Discord. I am watching YouTube. Love to get a couple of those answers. Because like I said, it's one of those things that if you've read the 3 or 4 different source materials, you've read them a few times, all the things kind of come together. If you haven't gotten the chance yet, obviously questions can still abound. And getting to the original announcement here from yesterday, let's get that up. The key thing here on the announcement, obviously, let me get that back up here. There we go. That's close enough. Getting back to the announcement from yesterday, obviously, there were some details in there. The easiest place, the best place to look at it, as always, is get to the real announcement. Always try to get to the real announcement if you can. That's where you can get the most details as opposed to just the teasers up front. Embarking on the first totem cycles in Upland. Obviously, we got a date, the 9th at 9 a.m. PT. The snapshot happens on the 8th. So it's important that we're having this conversation today because I will not be back on the air until the 8th in the evening. So let's make sure that everybody knows the snapshot. 8th, 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. PT, sometime in between. We don't know when, but just plan on 9 a.m. having what you want to hold for totems. That means they have to be in your asset wallet. You cannot have them consigned at a map asset shop. It was not going to count for you. It'll count for them. Keep that in mind. Be careful about having the totems you want to have before the snapshot. If you do not get the Protem drop, you can purchase Protem. Upland's going to have a sale. It's a lot easier just to get the Protem drop to you. If you choose to wait or you don't get any totems until afterwards, again, there will be a totem sale coming up later in the week, next week on Friday the 12th at 9 a.m. PT. Registration on that sale obviously open the day before 8 a.m. PT on the 11th on next Thursday. So you can get more Protem if you want to start stacking that Protem pile. And then the last bit of this overlay is that totem cycle does start. It is going to be a 30-day cycle, the first cycle, 5-day window to get started. That means that you have to start between the 9th at 9 a.m. PT and 5 days thereafter. If you get started within those 5-day windows, you'll run for 30-day cycle. Again, day number 1 or the 9th starts. You have 30 days from the 9th. You start on day number 2, the 10th. You have 30 days from the 10th. Same thing for the 11th, 12th, and 13th as well. So pretty easy. And that's going to run for 30 days. for your cycles. We'll get into a few more of the details here when I get into the better information as far as I'm concerned for knowing what your totem looks like and how you can get to a couple of those resources. But the other parts here of this particular cycle that we got some updates on. This image is a nice one. I'm glad that we have it. If you are following along on YouTube, you can see it. They gave us 3 pieces here, where you're going to have the little note on your totem where it tells you more information about how totem spending works. You have this little thing where when it's available, it's going to give you the opportunity to spend protem. You can specify how much protem you're going to put into your totem and then apply. And then, of course, it shows you what the reward looks like with the opportunity to collect after you've earned with your totem. Obviously, there are going to be a few definitions here we're going to take a quick look at. And then we're going to circle back again on the specifics of why your totem is different than other totems, but also has similar attributes to totems within a similar class. So we'll get into those things here. But a couple of the definitions we want to get into, of course, is the cycle. Cycle is 30 days. There will be at least 5 cycles. There may be less, there may be more. But this first cycle is 30 days. They have mentioned that the cycles may change in the future. Know that this first one is 30 days. Keep your eyes open for future cycles. When they start, obviously the rules will be defined by Upland as you enter them, and they may be different than this first one. You have 5 days again to get started. If you don't start within the first 5 days of activation, you don't enter a 30-day cycle. You have to sit out this cycle, which we'll just call cycle 1, and wait until cycle 2 starts, which is going to be at least 35 days away, maybe longer away when that becomes available. Obviously, like I mentioned, the totems, you are going to want to hold them and own them by the 8th between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. So again, by 9 a.m., if you want to get that initial protem drop, that initial protem drop is meant to get you started in your cycles with all the totems you have. The more totems you have, the more protem you get dropped. Different totems are probably, or not probably, are going to be dropped a different amount of protem. So you may have a different drop of protem than somebody who has the same number of totems as you, because your totems are different. So keep that in mind, and don't be surprised if the guy next to you gets twice as much protem as you did with the same number of totems, because it could happen, and I'm sure it will. You are going to be judged on a few things there. The output is going to be judged on essentially feeding this thing. That's the whole game. The whole game is you feed at the right time, you feed the right amount. Upland is not giving a guide that tells us which of the attributes is going to be a specific number of hours, or that we have to feed, a frequency that we have to feed at. There's not going to be a specific guide that's going to say from Upland, this is how much you have to feed your totem. But I'll get into some of the scales that we know about, some of the details we know about, and the way you can see where you fall on that scale. Scale right up front on the frequency, we were given a scale. The scale is between 0 and 50. I don't think that there's really a 0 frequency, but there's a frequency between 0 and 50, essentially meaning that the feed time, the ideal feed time, is between 0 hours, 50 hours, which means if you're at 50 hours, every 50 hours, your little guy needs to be fed. If you're at 2 hours, you're going to be waking up in the middle of the night, and the hope is that you don't end up with 2 hours. Again, we don't know where things lie on the scale, but we know where the start of the scale is. We know where the end of the scale is, and we know that there are steps along the way. We don't know where they are, but we know there's steps along the way that may be evenly spaced or may not be. We don't know yet. The totem, again, based on how you interact with that totem, if you feed at the right time and how much you feed, if you feed the right amount, you are going to have a score each cycle, or it's going to be cumulative as you go through. That is going to determine the efficiency, determine how much you receive versus the theoretical. There's a theoretical max outcome based on your input, based on your timing and your amount of input. Your output, what you're going to receive, is going to be that actual. It's going to be essentially, think of it as a coefficient that gets determined by your activity. That coefficient's multiplied by our theoretical, and that's where our actual is going to come from. Output, obviously, there's going to be an output curve, has a definition. An output curve just means that you're not going to get the same rewards every time you have this 50-hour or 20-hour or 10-hour, whatever your feed cycle is. You're not going to get the same reward. There's going to be different steps along the way. There's a just basic graph information. There's a linear graph. There's a hockey stick, where it goes up slowly and then jumps up at the end. There is wave, where some parts of the cycle it will be a high amount and some parts will be low, and the next amounts will be high and the next amounts will be low throughout the cycle, the entire month cycle. Sharp step, which means we're going to have a pretty steady amount and then a big jump and then a pretty steady amount. Keep that in mind. You could be a mild step, which is the same thing except not as significant a jump. And the last type of payout of archetype is going to be just static, and that's only one totem. So you're not going to have it unless you happen to have the llama totem. So that one can be set aside. And the reason why these payout types matter, these output curves matter, these archetypes matter, is because you shouldn't get discouraged. Once you know what you have, if you're getting a blank amount of output over the course of the first 3 days, you could be in one of these models that is going to pay out more later. If you're not happy or satisfied with the payout, with the early payout, you may be getting a lot more, 3 weeks down the line than you do in the beginning. That is part of the game. Part of the game is that this is randomized. Part of the game is that you are finding this out along the way. But of course, if you do everything right, that's how you're going to get the largest possible payout. Another definition, obviously, there's collection caps. Collection caps. This is a correction, or this is a quick note here because I heard a lot of discussion about this. The cap limits the amount of protum you can accumulate. Once it's reached, no more protum is added until you collect the existing amount. That means that's a cap to how much you can leave uncollected. It is essentially an incentive to act, a time in which you have to get involved to pop out your protum and put it into the pile. And keep that in mind. That is going to be important down the line. It is not happening this first cycle. That is something that's left off, at least at the beginning of the cycle. Upland may turn that cap on at any time. Like I said, there is a penalty. If you feed too much, you feed too little, or you feed at the wrong times, you're not going to get that max output. Feed too much, that extra food, gone. It's like you put all the food out for the chickens ate what they wanted, and they crapped in the rest. It's gone. If you insufficiently feed, it's going to be a penalty in that it's going to decrease the output. Again, you didn't feed the chickens enough. Instead of one egg every day, you're getting one egg every 2 days. Think of it that way. Pretty easy analogy there. Misspend penalty. You miss a whole cycle because you went on vacation with the buds. You're going to get a decrease. You're going to get a loss in efficiency. There are 4 different models in which that misspend penalty is applied. There's a variation 1, which is a penalty that increases cumulatively. It's going to build up until essentially you get a max penalty. No more outcome for the rest of the cycle. Again, these penalties are on a cycle basis. If you screw up in one cycle, take a deep breath. In a month or a month and a half, when the next cycle starts, you start out fresh. Etch a sketch. So don't get too worried if you screw up this cycle. You have more time to play. Hopefully, you made a little bit of a profit of protum. You can sit on it. You can be ready for the next cycle to start. This variation 2 is every time you spend or miss a spend opportunity, the life cycle. That means the number of cycles inside of that cycle period is going to be decreased. When you get to the new cycle period, obviously Etch a Sketch reset, but it means that instead of running the full 30 days, maybe you're down to 29 or 28 based on how long your cycle is, your actual cyclical cycle of feed and retrieve and feed and retrieve and feed and retrieve, or feed and collect, I should say. Variation 3 is you miss 5 intervals. Very little penalty or no penalty, but missing the 6th, boom, done. Your totem stops yielding altogether. That's variation 3. And variation 4, this is the most lenient. There was no penalties for missed spend intervals, making it ideal for players who might not be able to spend constantly. So if we can find what variation 4 is, you might be like, hey, I'm going to be going on vacation for this week. Maybe I buy the one with variation 4. So I still get outcome when I come back. I still can use it normally. I'm going to miss out on some feed cycles because if you don't feed, you don't receive, but you could still come back and finish out the rest of the cycle. You may want to go shopping based on that. And I've got a theory. I think it's relatively foolproof at this point because I think the rarity does affect the rarer they are, the better the feature, at least within reason. We have decent reason to believe that's the case. We do know what encodes this variation, this penalty. So we might just be able to give you a hint right off the bat of what you have with your totem. Apart from missed trends, there are penalties associated with how you spend your totem. Like I said, overspending, underspending. If you do multiple spends, quick here, you can only feed essentially once per feeding cycle. If you feed twice per feeding cycle, it takes the higher of the two feeds and the rest is gone. So think of it as you give, 5 slices of carrot, and then the second time you want to give 6 slices of carrot, and you actually just give 6 slices of carrot, and the 5 you were originally going to give wiped off the board. Pretty easy, pretty simple that way. Timing penalties, obviously, if you don't meet the optimal timing, you're too early or too late, it's going to reduce your yield. The system prompts players, again, to strategically identify and follow the totem's specific spending cycle for best results. Again, you can figure this out in a few cycles here, maybe, or a few turns within that first cycle. And maybe the last half of that first cycle is going to be that much more successful for you. Impact of penalties. Essentially, penalties could be significant in affecting your yield. They said it is theoretically possible that some totems, if you do the wrong thing, you may end up with less overall protem than you originally put in. Keep that in mind. But in most cases, the penalties seem like they're worth the risk. It seems like what Upland has said so far, that the rewards would be significant if you are within range. Again, a little bit of penalty is not going to kill you. If you screw up the process and keep feeding at the wrong times and fade way too much, you may lose major protem, including way too much feeds. That's the easiest ways to lose protem because you're not going to get any reward based on the overfeed, and you don't get the overfeed back. Understand totem traits, life form, style, color, scale, and totem base. This is where I want to go and take a look at another document that makes it easier to see all of these. I don't need to get into these. If we have those questions, love to get them answered, but these are pretty basic FYI, frequently asked questions, little pieces to get you a little more acquainted. But again, there's better information out there, easier information to get. Do you want to take a look at this thing that we should all have frequency with? And I will give you a heads up. This has been updated. I've talked about this in the past. I talked about it a month ago, 2 months ago, 6 months ago. Let's put it at 4 months ago. But back in August when this first came out, we had 2 resources. We had an Upland wiki, and we had upland.me/totems, which was just a countdown clock and a little bit of fun narrative about totems along the way. But this was always the most valuable thing with totems. It's been the most valuable thing since it was put out in August, and it's been improved along the way. Guides.upland.me/totems -wiki/totems/totems-traits. Easiest way to get there is to find it on the Upland landing page. There is a section under totems. You can find the totem guide from there. Pretty easy. You can find it under resources as well. So our big thing obviously is our totem traits. We've got a life form, got a style, got a color, got a scale, got a totem base. Again, that's 5 different visual traits. So we know our life form. Our life form is we're looking at a cheetah, are we looking at a gorilla, are we looking at a dragonfly? That's our life form. That's going to affect our output. Our output is going to be that cycle we talked about. Is it going to be bouncing up and down on a wave style? Is it going to be a hockey stick? That's going to be determined by the animal, by the life form type, by the type of plant it is. So if we keep that in mind, once we know how a cheetah behaves, or a gorilla behaves, or a llama, which we already obviously know, or a llama behaves, we know how everything of that life form type is going to behave for that payout. That is part of the learning curve. Upland said they want to build in there. Well, we just made it a lot easier for ourselves. Once somebody else knows what's going on, now you know what's going on. Keep in mind, some of these output cycles may take a while to learn, because if it's going to be 3 or 4 cycles flat, it could be a couple different things. It could be a gradual step, or it could be a steep step. It could be a hockey stick if it's relatively level, gradual coming up. If it feels like it's a little more one day as the next, that could still be a gradual step, or it could be a linear. We don't know from the beginning. A linear would essentially say your output towards the end of that cycle is going to be significantly better than the beginning. So you better be collecting towards the end, because that's where your best rewards are going to be. So life form, identifying how your life form behaves is going to be important. We're going to work on that together. Once we get some data, once we have some data later in the month, or within a few days, hopefully, of this cycle, we can all figure out what is what and how they all behave. Style is your input. That's going to be how much we want to put in here. So I come over here, here's style, gives us a little better idea. There are 7 variations of style. Most rare is elegant. Least rare, apologize, vice versa. From the least is elegant, most is fluid. So if you're fluid, that's going to be your best. Our assumption that rarest is the best, I think that's a pretty easy to say that's going to be the case. So fluid is your rarest, and this is going to be your input attribute. This is going to represent the amount of protem spend that generates yields in a cycle. Top tier protems boost higher yieldable input. That means if I am fluid versus elegant, I'm going to put more into a fluid. If I'm an elegant, I'm going to put a little bit of in, a little bit of out. That's the theory here of how much you input. Once I know what I have, if I have gamer, I know I probably don't have a big input. If I have fluid, I probably have a big input. We don't know exactly what the definition of big input is, but we can say that fluid is going to be a bigger input than a future, and a future is going to be a bigger input than a gamer. Again, if we follow the lines, elegant, gamer, ancient, fantasy, future, painted, fluid, that's going to be the scale. That's going to be the ramp up from least to most input. I think we have pretty good reason to believe that's the case. Again, that is the direction of rarity, from least rare to most rare. We're going to get back to our life forms here. Again, we know of our 11 life forms. We don't know what corresponds with what. There is some rarity tied in there, so maybe the better sounding ones tied to gorilla, which is more rare. We don't really know that, because there are archetypes. With the archetypes here. So we said 6 archetypes. One of them only exists with one llama. So throw that away. That doesn't exist. So we have 5 archetypes. That means of the 11 life forms, the outputs, or the 11 we have, the outputs are going to end up following into these 6. To take the 10 that we have that everyone has, we're going to fall into 5. That means 2 per. And whether they break up by the chapters they were in, whether they break up by some other method, we don't know yet. We're going to have to watch this over time and see what falls into linear, what falls into hockey stick, what falls into wave, sharp step, and mild step. And you know what? We could all be surprised. Linear could be 1. Chapter 2 could be hockey stick. Chapter 3 could be wave. It could be that simple, but we're not going to know until we get there. Color. So color, we talk about what ties to what. Colors are frequency. So frequency is how many hours in between feeds. We're going to go from the same thing here. We're going to go with the least rare to most rare. We're going to assume, and I think there's good reason to believe this assumption is correct, most rare is going to be the best, which would be the longest. I would assume. I might be wrong, but I would assume it's the longest, because it means that you don't have to interact every 4 hours. And every 4 hours sounds crazy. So you get the same output maybe over a 2-day period, but you only interact once every 50 hours for a gold. Again, we don't know that this is the case. I'm assuming it's that way. I could be surprised and it could be inverted because Upland might think that having all these cycles, if the cycles end up paying out the same as the other cycles would, having more cycles would actually be better than less cycles. I don't know. Less repetition, I should say, inside that circle one. I don't know which way that's going to run, but we do know we're running from orange to gold in terms of least rare to most rare. Orange, gold, purple, green, red, blue, and gold as being least rare to most rare. Most rare, obviously, I would assume is going to have the best traits. And I'm going to assume the longest feed cycle is going to be best traits because it's going to be easiest not to run into penalties. But again, I could be surprised because Upland might say that you're going to want to have more feed cycles because it's going to make more profit for you. I don't know. We'll have to watch out and figure that one out. That one is unsure at this time. With our styles, we're pretty certain of. Like I said, I'm pretty certain that the higher yield is going to go with the more rare. So fluid is going to be higher yield than elegant, and then obviously scale in between. Our scale, that's the size. So we have 9 variations. We have micro, small, normal, medium, large, extra large, huge, gigantic, and epic, ranging from the least in size to the most in size, ranging from the most common to the least common. So there's more micros out there than there are mediums. There are mediums out there than there are large, extra larges. There's more extra larges than there are epics, period. This is the capacity. And this is essentially between the times that you collect, how much you can carry. And that's what the cap's going to be. It sounds like they're going to turn the cap off up front. I don't know if the cap is per or the overall cap, but they're going to turn the cap off up front. How many, how often you have to collect, how much you can leave uncollected. Once it gets turned on, I think that cap may be across the board. It may be all of your totems. There may be a way that it gets scaled. We'll have to see. But capacity is, again, where a natural cap is going to be, where if you don't collect, it's going to stop accumulating for each of your totems. Micro is going to have a smaller cap than epic, of course. They're scaled in between. And totem base. This is one that we can figure out. I'm pretty sure, I'm confident we have this down. This is one that we have a most rare to a least rare. Most rare, obviously, being circle, least rare being hexagon. There's a lot of hexagons out there. Hexagon, pentagon, square, and circle is the direction that goes. And base is your stamina. Remember, that's our penalty. This is going to be how you get penalized for missed. What happens to your totem and the corresponding penalties. Like hardy animals and plants, some totems have higher stamina, enduring missed fields with less severe penalties or without getting any severe penalties. Well, let's go back and take a look at what we were looking at, or we were just looking at, I should say. And we see that when we look at our penalties, we see that the misspend penalty variation 4, that seems pretty nice. There's not any spend penalties. So I would say that's the most rare. So I would come back here and I'd say that's going to be our circle. I'm going to assume we're scaled because it feels scaled. It feels like we are looking at a variety of penalties with some of these penalties being worse than the others for misspend penalties. Where the variation number 2, variation number 2 is 5 spends and then the 6 kicks off or cuts off the cycle for the rest of the cycle. Obviously, that's going to be our second most rare. Second most rare is square. So square is going to be that you can do it 5 times, 6 times you're done. Penalty number 2, variation number 2 is every time you miss a spend opportunity, the life cycle of your totem is shortened by 1 interval. That means less of these overall intervals to get prizes, to get rewards through the cycle. You might get your cycle stopped short. That's variety number 2. So variation number 2. Let's come back. That looks like pentagon. So pentagon is going to be variation 2, and that variation 1. It seems the worst. I'm going to assume it's the most common. I'm going to assume it lines up again. This is an assumption, but it does seem to be scaled that way. For each spend opportunity you miss, future intervals suffer a yield reduction. That means It does seem like that's the most common penalty. Every time you miss a feeding, a cycle, you're going to increase this penalty. This penalty is going to be continued to be applied to the rest of the feed cycles, and you're going to have a larger and larger penalty, meaning you're going to be affected how much you get or along the way. So we're going to be affected to potentially stop our cycle at some point throughout the way by getting this penalty. Keep that in mind. So this seems like the common one. Being the common one, we'll go back to our common, see hexagon. We'll see that hexagons are most common. So that is one thing that I think we're pretty common, pretty clear on is the totem basis. Life form is the one we have no clue on. We don't know exactly how that is organized. Is it organized, like I said, most rare to least rare life forms? Is it by week? We don't know. We'll have to figure that out. The color, like we said, that is one that we are going to get a better idea of the scale, but we're looking at 0 hours to 50. I assume it's the shortest in orange and the longest in gold. I could be exactly the opposite, could run exactly the opposite way, but we'll know shortly. Which means a quick strategy to deal with that is to spend lower than you think. See it if it gives you a underspend notation. It's better to underspend than to overspend. Underspend is going to affect you on the day. Way significantly overspending, maybe getting rid of so much protum that you don't have that protum to keep feeding in the future. Keep that in mind. You don't want to throw that protum away. But once you have a good idea of where you are along the line of a frequency, we know how often we're going to feed, right? So that's going to be relatively easy there. Style is going to be that input. That's going to be the reason we're going to feed low and then get a better idea. And like I said, I think this one is pretty clear. Elegant is going to be you feed it a little teeny bit and you get a little teeny output. And fluid, which is the best on that scale, is going to be a big input and a big output. I think we have a pretty strong clarity on style. We have a pretty strong clarity on totem bases. We could be surprised on color. We could have that flipped. I think that scale, that scale here is going to put us at a pretty clear one too. You have a larger capacity, the larger you are. And then, like I said, we got two things that we could be surprised on. That we may be entirely surprised on. Life form, who has a clue? Color, of course. I could be surprised they could flip it on me, but we have some indication there. And otherwise, other than that, some of the questions that we are seeing on that, let me see if we've got any in the cafe. Good place to find it. Agency, just shake it up. I don't see any specific questions on there. A couple of other common questions I've seen, or I would say, confusions on this is cycles are cycles. I mentioned the Etch-a-Sketch model. I want people to keep that in mind. This idea that we run a cycle for a period of time. What happens in that cycle can affect what happens in the rest of the cycle. So you have a 24-hour feed period. Let's just make it easy. You have 30 24-hour feed periods. What you do in the first 10 of those 24-hour feed periods may affect what happens in the next 20 days of the 30-day period. If you screw things up, you have a horrible month, the cycle 1 is trash, your cycle 2 may be much better. If you screw up so bad and the first day you put all of your protum in your totem and you find out that your totem has a little input because you didn't follow the concept of little input for our small on the scale, our low on that side. Again, looking at input, the easiest way to get a better idea of our input is look at the list. Look at the list of our variations. Little input for the elegant, big input for the fluid. Everything is scaled in between. And if you put way too much on an elegant, for example, you toss that protum away. Day 2, you'll see if you got yield again. That yield, what that cycle of the yield is. If that yield is going to be pretty consistent or climbing or some other form of yield curve, that's going to be determined by your life form, which we don't know for sure yet. But that is going to be something that's key and important here. Is if you overspend, you may not get enough input back or output back because you may have the wrong input or output curve. We don't know. We're going to have to keep our eyes open on this, of course. And of course, this is going to be something where we have learning curve. But because we have the opportunity to make mistakes, there is the opportunity to refresh things. I would recommend, and this is just my side of things, I would recommend starting your cycle as early as you can. There is a 24-hour period, the first 24 hours that the first cycle is open, where if you do get started in that 24-hour period, if you don't wait to day 5, you start on day 1, you are going to get a badge for being an early starter, essentially an originator of these cycles. So I will be doing that. You only have to do it with one of your totems. You don't have to do all of your totems. And I will be collecting that badge. I'll be very happy to do so. But the other reason why I'm going to get an early start is because if I make a mistake in the first 4 days, when Friday rolls around, the first 3.5 days, I should say, when Friday rolls around, I'm going to have the ability to make the decision if I want to buy some Protom. And again, why would I buy a Protom? I've really screwed up. I would rather run my first cycle right through, not get caught along the way, go and buy some Protom. So maybe I'll do that. Maybe those 3 days are going to be the opportunity to make the decision. Or maybe I just say I'm going to buy a bunch of Protom and sit on it. I think the one thing that is noted here on the sale for Protom is Upland's going to make a relatively large amount available, which means it probably isn't going to sell out immediately. It may. Who knows if people get greedy on it? But the idea that Upland's trying to put out there is they want people to be able to have the Protom sit in the sale for a little while, or the people who really need it can get to it. It's not going to get all sold out to the first 10 comers. So that is a concept that if you get stuck, there's a once per cycle opportunity to get out of it. If you miss this opportunity, the cycle 1 doesn't start for you because you wait till 6 days in and you start cycle 2. There will be a sale sometime in cycle 2 to get Protom. And the sale in Protom of Protom is also ideal for those who get a really late start. I recommend holding on to all the totems that you want to own before the snapshot. Let's say people hold on to their totems, get the Protom snapshot, and decide to sell their totems. They assume they're going to sell the totems for less. I would assume they sell the totems for less because no Protom comes with it. So they sell it for less, and you have the opportunity to buy a totem at a discount after the snapshot on Monday. So late in the day, Monday, early day, Tuesday, you go and buy from your local and friendly map asset shop. You buy a totem at a discount. Now you don't have any Protom dropped with it. When you come to that sale on Friday, you can buy some Protom. You can still get started in that 5-day window, which is huge. So that's the other reason why this sale makes sense to exist. I am glad it exists. I get the point of it. It's kind of a buying an extra life. Buying an extra life, if we call this a gamification, which again, this is the first game loop in the game of Upland. Very much excited about the future of what this game loop looks like. Again, this is a very similar game loop to what we'll have with Life. Upland had put this hint out to us previously. It is like that game loop that Life will be, but on steroids, just like what we saw with Spud versus Spark. It was a souped up, a sped up version. It was easier to apply, quicker to build. You required less input, you got more output. You didn't have to, theoretically wait as long to build. So because of those factors, it was easier to cycle and test and see how things are working. Life might be slower, might be a lower input, might be a lower output. We might see a different scale altogether when it comes to Life in the game of Upland. But this is our opportunity to refine the game loops, get the bugs worked out, be able to, as players, get used to it, practice, be ready for Life. And this is just my guess. It's sometime in 6 months because we have 5 cycles of these to run. Upland may take breaks between cycles at some point. Upland may extend the period of cycles. They may add another cycle if they feel they need another cycle of these totems before we get Life. I do want to do a couple more questions here because we didn't see them from the group, but I do want to get this big one. Big one is what happens to my totem after the 5th cycle. It's a map asset. It's a map asset without the future of any utility once the last cycle happens. Again, if Upwind adds a 6th cycle, they add a 6th cycle. But if there's a call to the end and we say goodbye to all of our Protem totem cycles, our Protem becomes available for exchange for STEM, 1-to-1 exchange ratio, and we're done with Protem. That means we're also done with that utility of a totem. A totem becomes a pretty little map asset on the corner of our property. Kiro, thank you for asking the question. If you didn't have a totem during the stop shot, if you don't have a totem during a snapshot, you would be excluded from the sale. No, that's incorrect. You have to own a totem at the time of the Protem sale. And thank you for bringing that up, Kiro. I didn't put that out there. There is an exclusion. The exclusion is you cannot go to that Protem sale and just buy a stack of Protem because you want Protem and sit on the Protem until STEM comes without getting involved in the totem market. You have to own a totem. That's your gate and that's your key to be able to be part of the Protem sale. Again, this is a mechanic Upland's been working on, gated and keyed sales. So you buy this totem on Monday or Tuesday after the snapshot. Now you own a totem. You don't own Protem along with it, so now you have to acquire some. You're going to acquire that from the UPX store on Friday. Keep it in mind, there's a registration period. Keep it in mind, Upland says there's going to be plenty for people. I would hope so. And then keep in mind, there's going to be a cost. And that cost is likely, and it looks like it, is going to be in USD. Sounds like you can get some UPX with it. We don't have the definition of how much UPX you're going to get. There is a graphic that Upland put out. I never take those graphics as serious. I always take them with a grain of salt. They tell us that they do those as illustrative. That may not be the actual payout or the actual cost, but you put in an amount of USD, you're going to get some UPX back. You're going to get some Protem back. That is the style of sale we expect. X1 did say that in the cafe or in the plaza during the explanation that there will be a sweetener style, which means you're buying UPX. You're also getting something that's in addition to the UPX that you're getting. We don't know how much UPX you're getting for how many dollars. We don't know how much Protem you're going to get in each of those bundles, but we do know it's coming. 14. I have 14. I would like to sell some. This seems very complicated. 11. I will make it easy, and I hope I can. The easiest thing that I can say is there's two things you're doing with your Protem. You're feeding it an amount of food, and you're feeding it at an interval of time. On day 1, you may not know what that interval of time is. On day 2, you may still not know what that interval of time is. But after a couple feed cycles, you will know what that interval of time is. I will figure it out. The analytic assassins will figure it out. You'll probably have somebody else, if you have another group that you hang out with, they will probably have figured it out. We'll be able to tell you. We'll be able to say, hey, you have this. This is what you should expect your cycle, your number of hours to be. We'll figure out based on what you have for type, how much you're supposed to feed. And we can provide that information. We'll figure that information out. Again, Upland's calling this a gamification. This is something you're doing. I agree. It's a gamification. It's your game. It's part of the game. It's part of the game I'm playing. But I also think that Upland is a community. So I think that as people figure these things out along the way, that's a resource that the community is going to be able to share. So once we know as a community, Levin, we'll share it as a community. It may take a few days to know all of the details, but as we get through a few days of failures, we're going to be able to all be a lot closer to success by being able to have better definitions. So, and again, thank you for that question, Levin. Understand that it sounds complicated. We want to make it easy. We want to work together on this. And I want this to be fun. I want everybody to be as close to perfect as they can be. I want everyone to get great Protem yields. And I want to give a hint. The hint I want to give is that cycle 1 may not be the same input-output ratio as cycle 2. So for me, I want to take output or cycle 1 seriously because I think Upland's going to lean towards the overcompensation up front. They've done it in the past where they're like, ooh, too much spark was being given out in those early spark hunts. We can't let people get 12 spark in a week. So they changed the hunt dynamics. And again, we're talking 2 years ago. I'm not talking about anything recent. We don't need to get into that little bag of apples. But we, if there is a overcompensating structure, usually it gets taken away. They don't usually start to under compensated. They may, but if it is undercompensated the first cycle, then I'll take the bonus the second cycle. But I want to take the first cycle seriously, because if there is overcompensation, I want all of us to get that overcompensation. That overcompensation is going to put you and I and anybody with totems who is going to be working seriously with their totems in a better position when life starts, because we're going to take our program, we're going to extend it into STEM, and we're going to have our STEM to get started with our life cycles. And I'm looking forward to the life cycles. I'm looking forward to seeing everybody who chose to invest in totems get rewarded for them. And the more people invested in totems, I really hope the more they're going to get rewards. To the point of the difficulty, Levin, we're going to get all the information we can to you. We're going to do it as soon as possible. It may take days. We're going to do it as soon as possible. But I will give you one hint. 14 is going to be harder to keep track of than 7. And 7 is going to be harder to keep track of than 1. Just keep that in mind. As long as you keep that in mind, Levin, you may be able to make the 14 work. You may find that it's asking you to be awake 22 hours a day, but the options are there. And again, the penalties aren't absolute. And Levin, if they die, they die. No, if they die, they die. No, it's again, different penalties. You may have a great penalty. The greatest penalty is nothing. Do as you like and enjoy. And you did bad for 4 days. On the 5th day, you do good, you get your reward. So we'll see, or you get your full reward, say. So we'll see how this all rolls out in the end. We'll work together on it. We're looking forward to it. We have a lot of details. We have some questions left. I've got a couple things that I said that I'm not sure if the scale goes up or the scale goes down, but we know that the scale travels in a linear direction, or we're pretty sure the scale travels in a linear direction. Most rare, probably getting the best. Least rare, probably getting the worst, if we're looking at anything that is scaled like that. And of course, we don't know what animals are. And of course, Kiro, bust out this Excel spreadsheet. That is a point I wanted to make. Today is the last day I get to talk to people before that snapshot. We'll talk again on Monday before we actually start the cycles. But yes, get that spreadsheet together. You're going to want to put each of your totems into that spreadsheet. You're going to want to put in your spreadsheet what times you feed at based on when you started, how many hours, once we know, how many hours from the last feed cycle to the next feed cycle. You say the last time you fed, you put in there the next time you feed. Once you've got a good cycle going, you can keep that going. Keep in mind, if you're on a 7-hour cycle or an 8-hour cycle, it's going to be different times a day, different days of the week. So that is how we start losing sleep. That's how we start having the midnight timers. Again, you miss a feed cycle, there's a penalty for it. It's not the end of the world, but we know that there's different penalties. But the better we do on our feed cycles, the better we do on our feed amounts, the better rewards we're going to get on the end. And again, that's part of the game. And I know a lot of treasure hunters, Kiro being one of them, that when there's a key treasure hunt, change the sleep schedule for that key treasure hunt. Maybe it's worth changing your sleep schedule for Protem. Maybe it's not, depending on your situation. But again, we're going to get all the information to each other as soon as we can. We're going to build those Excel spreadsheets. Maybe we'll share some examples so people can put their own spreadsheets together. And of course, easiest thing in the world is you put one column in there and leave it there. And once you know, that's your ideal feed for each of our Protems, or each of our totems, whatever's our Protem amount. So we'll know what each of those feed is. Again, very easy. That portion, very easy once that's set up. The hard thing is waking up at 2:00 in the morning to feed that crying totem. So for tonight, let's leave it this way. On Monday, have the totems you want to have. On Tuesday, we're going to start the cycle. Start within 24 hours of 9 a.m. on Tuesday if you want to get a badge. It's an easy badge to get. It's going to be a great badge to have. Let's get that badge if we can. And then, of course, if you want to do that with one of your totems, you want to leave off the rest of the totems to day 2, 3, 4, 5, because you want that information to start trickling in. You want people to start being able to say, hey, we figured the scale out, and share it with you for day 2, 3, 4. That's a great strategy too. The strategy's up to you. But again, if you start one of your totems on day one within the first 24 hours, that's how we get that badge. And I know a lot of people like the badges. So besides that, let's have a great weekend. Get some sleep, because starting next week, you may have a very little bit of sleep for the next month. We may have a very full January. And of course, this is the future of Upland. We've got the next 4 or 5 months, maybe more, to continue to play along this way. So keep that in mind. So for tonight, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I am going to try to put out a short version of the tips, the hints, the how to decipher the totem code out over the weekend into YouTube. The long version is going to be up as of 2 seconds from now, and of course, we're going to open up for conversation here in about 2 seconds. Feel free to open your mics. Feel free to say what you have to say. And again, if you have questions, either put them in the Upland Cafe chat or open up, use your voice. I'm going to mute myself so you can speak. Thank you much, everybody. And we'll see you again on Monday to talk about, after the snapshot, how much Protem we all got. Thank you. Mics are open. Floor is yours.